Hey everybody, we're live again. Thank you for tuning in. This is Cammie with Cut the Clutter. We are doing our expert interviews as I finish up a final round for our manuscript. And joining me today with how to get more out of life by living with less is a guest expert, Scott Barkley, and he is the owner of BioDecon Solutions. And if that doesn't give you a hint to what his expertise is all about, please give me a warm welcome for Scott. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So the reason you're like, why? I don't do what you do. Why are you interviewing me? I got a chuckle out of your questions, but really, when people don't know what I do, even my closest family members, they're like, okay, so how do you, I get this question all the time. And the first thing that pops up into people's minds is the TV show, So You Work with Hoarders. And so I have to say, no, we don't typically work with somebody on that scale of hoarding because there's so many different facets to it. So can you tell me the difference from your perspective, what it means to be organized versus someone who's actually hoarding?
On the hoarding aspect, it really has to do with the amount of stuff they have. If someone is just disorganized and has clutter, you might take up space in a room. It's just because they haven't organized it, putting stuff in shelves or in their closet or getting totes for it or whatever it is. People who actually hoard after we end up cleaning out the house and have whatever stuff we take out, a lot of times it probably would be helpful to have, someone who does work with hoarders and professional organizing come in there and help people to get their, get their organization together so they don't run into the same problem with having people come in there or having, them making a mess again and having to give us a call to help clean it up for them.
Right. So people call your company when they are at more of what I would say is severe hoarding. So maybe a typical client for you is somebody who can't even walk on their floor. Would you say that's a good indicator of somebody who is hoarding? What's your first, how do you identify a hoarder?
Generally, a lot of it has to do, at least from my aspect, I know there's with the hoarding disorder and, what that all entails, but it's if they can't use their kitchen to cook, their bathroom to go to the bathroom in, or a bed to sleep on, if they're sleeping on their sofa or on a pile of clothes or whatever it is, then that's when I consider it hoarding, where it starts taking over your life and you don't let people come to your house because you're embarrassed, or when it starts taking over your personal life, and then that's hoarding.
Okay, and so usually is it the customer who's actually contacting you most of the time, or is it like a third party? Like, I know I've had a police department actually tell a client, like, if you don't get some help in here, we're not going to be able to get to you next time.
Oh, I would say it's probably like 50-50. I'll get calls from people who are the hoarders living in the house, and half the time of them it'll be either they live in an apartment, they have an inspection coming up, or they're getting evicted, or their landlord's coming to, they're getting close to getting kicked out, or they have a repair that needs to be done, and the repair person needs to get into the house, get access to it. The other half, it's just they've had enough. They finally want to change their life and be able to have friends and family come over into their house. And then the other half, it's their family who calls, or a friend who says, they're either doing it without them knowing, or they've given them permission to contact us, or people are in a hospital. We get that a lot. They're in a hospital and they're like, all right, now it's time to swoop in, which they still have their legal rights to, they still got to sign the paperwork and get permission from the actual homeowner or whoever lives in the house before we do anything like that. But it's about 50-50.
Wow. So those are a lot of real life scenarios that really painted a picture for me, and why people call you in this situation. People just think hoarders and cleanup, but you just really painted a picture. Somebody's in the hospital or on their deathbed and things are happening. This is like a high stress, high level situation for a lot of people. This is not something that, like light house cleaning. It's a very impactful situation. And so dealing with clients and their clutter, this is something that I can say safely, you see on an extreme end. Do you see any, symbolic things throughout that thread all of these stories with hoarding? Like, is there something in common that you see with all of these clients?
A lot of them have in common is usually trauma with them losing friends or loved ones. Either they've lost a couple of loved ones in a short period of time, and usually kind of have tendencies before then. They're a little disorganized or a little clutter. And then after stuff like that happens, then it spirals out of control and just gets worse and worse and worse. And so trauma seems to be the biggest thing.
Now, do you also break down like stages of a hoard? So like I've been told before there's different levels of hoarding, from really extreme hoarding. Because when I think of hoarding, I just think you're hoarding. And in your industry, I've been told there's like actual levels to hoarding.
There are, but to me, that doesn't affect me what the job I'm going to do. It's more going to affect the price and how much labor it's going to take. I think there's 5 levels. If you're that 5th level, then it's going to take a lot of work to get all that stuff out of there. But I don't tell them like this is a level 1 or level 2. It doesn't, to me, it's just going to mean more labor, more time to get it cleaned up.
Right. I like how you kind of look at it as, here's the problem. I'm not going to categorize it into any different level. Here's just what it's going to take to get the job done.
Yeah.
And I always say that the experts in your field in hospice care are really honorable souls, because it takes such a special person not only to be able to handle the client's emotions, but also handle the outcome of the project. And so how do you begin with something like hoarding? How do you get through to the client first?
Well, usually they're wanting it, if they're going to be present, I would say more than half the time the client whose actual house it is or apartment is not present. Either they don't want to be present, or said they're hospitalized or whatever the case is, and after they've given permission to clean it out. So I don't have to deal like on the hoarding show. I don't know if I can deal with dealing with somebody like that every job. I don't know how mentally I'd be able to handle some of those situations. But we did a couple every once in a while. We'll get someone who wants to be a part of it, and then they are difficult to work with because they want to hold on to everything. And I just got to deep breaths, and a lot of it's just being patient with the people and just understanding, and just and sometimes maybe you have to sneak a piece or two away without them knowing that it's total garbage and move on.
Which, in my field, we were like, oh, no, you don't do that. But in a situation where somebody is truly hoarding and it is impeding their quality of life, you have to make some of those executive decisions, because every single piece of fur and garment and none of it, everything holds an emotional value to them most of the time, that I have noticed. And so when you're in a hoarding cleanup, where do you start? Like, how do you start?
And how so the actual like cleanup?
Yeah.
Beforehand, we have an idea beforehand what we're going to be doing. Some houses, everything just goes if the people have passed away or whatever the situation is. Generally, I get like a list of them or have them tagged with bright colored tape if, the stuff they want to keep, or I get a list of here's all the items we want to keep.
Oh, okay.
Everything else, is going to be going. And I'd say also about half the time everything goes, half time we're kind of picking through things. We're looking for, important, keeping our eyes out for important documents, jewelry, cash, or any other sentimental photos and stuff like that they want to keep.
Well, I'm sure that you've also discovered things people have forgotten about.
That would probably be like most of the stuff that people do. They just, until they see that, like if it's the whole out of sight, out of mind. And that's the case for a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of the clients we have. And so once they say you're throwing something out that you think it's okay to go, and then they see it, they've forgotten about it, but once they see it, they remember exactly, when they got it or why they have it or what it means to them, and then it kind of slows things down.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a client this week, which she was on the border of somebody who we would typically work with and help with, and she was on the border of somebody who needs a hoarding expert, and she was on the borderline of compulsive hoarding. So it was livable, it was clean, she could actually use her spaces, but the amount of clutter was definitely taking over. And something she said to me, sitting in her living room, and she looks over and she's like, "You see that?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's your dining room. I see a table somewhere in there." She's like, "I don't even look at that room anymore. I don't even know what's over there." And so for somebody that is hoarding, not only are they gaining back their room, but the functionality of their life, and they're discovering literally a space that they've lived in that can be completely transformed by somebody of your expertise.
Uh-huh.
So something that I would love to know, and I'm sure my viewers and listeners and readers would too, because they always ask me this as well. What is the craziest thing that you've ever seen on a hoard?
Oh goodness. So we do like biohazards as well with the hoarding, and so we also do deep cleanings if people want them after we do the hoard. After we do the clean out, we'll do deep cleanings, and so I got I had two of them. They both involve human waste. One person in an apartment, she was getting it cleaned out because they had an apartment inspection coming up, and her bathroom had stopped, her toilet had stopped working at some point, and her house was already kind of hoarded out, so she was embarrassed to call a plumber. And so then she started making kind of mess in the bathroom, and then she started going right on the ground, going number 2, and right on the floor between her kitchen and her living room. And there was about a 3-foot pile of human feces sitting on the floor. And hundreds of Ziploc bags of urine tossed in the living room.
That's really actually very heartbreaking.
That's my top. When people are like, "Oh, have you seen worse?" That tops it out. And she was like a mid-30s young professional. Like from the outside looked like everything was okay, and just at home it wasn't.
And this is in an apartment building.
Yeah.
Oh my word. And so this is the thing that gets me too, is people have a stereotype of what a hoarder is. So I love you sharing that story, because that's the humanity of it. This is somebody who you wouldn't think is struggling with this issue, and how severe it can be. And a lot of times people, they do call in your expertise, usually when something goes wrong. If they have a health problem, they'll call you, especially if something needs to be fixed, because they need to finally bring somebody into their home. Like you said, there's family members and relatives, boyfriends, husbands that aren't even allowed into certain spaces or even into the home at all.
Yeah.
And the breaking point is usually somebody who has to get in to do a repair or something of that nature. And that's kind of the breaking point where you come in and say, okay.
It's kind of I think they call them, like, a lot of times, like, forced cleanouts, where if they're getting evicted or if they're, where something has to be done and they don't necessarily want it done, and then they're forced, and that's really tough on a lot of people.
Absolutely. And so what resources do you share with people in that kind of situation?
I generally tell them, like, if they want, they want like an outpatient type, if they want like a counselor, someone who deals in hoarding, there's a website, and the lady is out of Tacoma, at least one of her offices, and it's called thehoardingproject.org. And she's head of the Pierce County, King County has a hoarding task force, and she's head of that. So usually I tell them, go to their websites, and they have lots of great resources for, that's if they're looking for extra resources for ongoing maintenance, for at least their mental wise.
And that's the thing too, is that for anyone who is watching this, we're not trying to expose people for entertainment value. We just have been doing this a long time, so we've seen the worst and the best. And the beautiful part about all of this is that there are resources and tools to help you through it. There is nothing, even in this case that Scott just shared with us, that in that situation, we're able to help. There's always resources for you and for anyone if you're just willing to ask for help. So on the same token, Scott, and flipped a little bit, so that was definitely your worst, but what was your best outcome? Because there has to be some gleaning moments for you to keep going in this field of work.
Well, I mean, the outcome of that turned out nice. I mean, our house, we had to rip out the carpets. I mean, most of the jobs we do, the outcome usually turns out pretty well with the house cleans up, get the clutter out, the house cleans up good. Let me think. We did some with with parents, with single moms and their kids and their hoarding, and their house is unsanitary, and usually a family member, someone steps in and says this needs to change. So we've done a couple of jobs like that, and it's nice that a child can be in the house safely without having to breathe in any dust or rodent feces in the air. So most of our jobs end up being good stories, and everything turns out okay.
And that really is a beautiful thing too. For me personally, growing up, I am a child and product of hoarding, and not to the extreme that there were feces on the ground or anything like that. But I was raised between my mother, who was a single mom, and my grandparents, and they all, did the best they can. And underneath all these issues, you have to realize there's a human being who's really trying to do the best that they can at that moment. So I never hold any judgment for someone in that situation. And so for children in hoarding, sometimes people will get really defensive and they'll say, oh, you have no right to have these children and you're living this certain way. And I can be a testimony to that, to anyone who is watching or listening today, that there's different levels of hoarding, and it's always best for children to be with their family and working out their issues together. And like I said, I am a product of a hoarding family. And for my story and my family, not only was there light at the end of the tunnel for myself growing up, but for my family. And later, in turn, I found my passion and developed this career for helping people in that kind of situation. So the biggest factor is getting help when you need it and finding the resources and being vulnerable enough to ask for help. So Scott, for anyone who is watching or listening to this interview who is thinking about getting help, or maybe thinking about, maybe I do have some hoarding tendencies, or maybe I don't, but I want to cut the clutter from my life. Do you have any tips or any last words you would like to leave our viewers or listeners with?
Call someone, either reach out to friends, family, or a company such as mine who help with that. You don't have to be like on the Hoarder Show where it's, every room's filled to the brink. We'll sometimes come out, just do a room or two if that's what you have. You just gotta reach out and get the help. And that's, a lot of people feel overwhelmed, and that's usually why they have a hard time starting to clean up where they started, and they get overwhelmed and don't finish it. Is get outside help, whether it's your friends, family, or from a company or a stranger.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate your time. People need to hear the story. They need to hear that there's options, because it's not mainstream, like getting a plumber or an electrician, like call up hoarding cleanup, or people just don't really know mainstream that these services are available to help you wherever you are on this scale, whether you have educational resources that you consume or physical resources where people can actually interact with you one-on-one to get you from point A to point B. So thank you so, so much for joining us. And everyone who is listening or watching, you can get more always at organizingexperts.com. And for more on Scott and his hoarding services here in the Seattle area, he's located in Puyallup, but do you service, before I give an announcement?
Yes, I've gone up to Bellingham before. We go Seattle, Everett, down to Vancouver, most of Western Washington.
So they will go wherever you need them to go. Biodecon Solutions, Scott Barkley. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.